Welcome to the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, where we bring you the best labor stories from the front lines of the movement and the voices that power it, from union halls to rural hospitals to international book tours. A quick word before we get to today's show. The Union's Power America sweepstakes from our friends at Union Plus is back for year 5, and yeah, you could win some serious cash. We're talking 40 grand and a dream trip to New York City. If you want better odds, just knock out a few fun online activities to rack up those bonus entries. This Labor Day could change your life. You can enter today at unionpowerusa.com. No purchase necessary. See official rules at unionpowerusa.com. On this week's show,
I think this is the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. This is one of the most catastrophic bills I think I've ever seen in our lifetime. And I just don't really understand why there was not a larger sense of urgency. I mean,
That's Chuck Corra on the Valley Labor Report with a deep dive into what those cuts mean for working class communities across Appalachia and for all of us. And in Colorado, the Labor Exchange on KGNU talks with Adam Fox from the Colorado Consumer Health Initiative about how rural clinics and hospitals could shut down under the weight of those same Medicaid cuts, even for those with private insurance.
Clinics and hospitals, especially in rural areas, but really across the state, to probably reduce services and or potentially close altogether. So regardless of whether you have private insurance or Medicaid, you're still going to have to drive that distance if those providers are forced to close from these cuts.
Then we plug into the booming world of data centers on The Line, the podcast from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, where IBEW leaders explain how AI is fueling a construction explosion and why the union will need tens of thousands of new electricians in just the next few years.
You have to keep in mind, these locations, most of these locations aren't going to be one data center. They're going to be campuses. And they may have half a dozen, 10, 15 or more data centers on one campus. The customer that we met with last week, again, this is just one customer. It's one of the large ones. We're going to need between 8,000 and 12,000 electricians in the next 3 years just for their projects.
Over on the Heartland Labor Forum, novelist Rachel Kushner talks about her new book, Creation Lake, inspired by real-life FBI infiltration of eco-activists and the complex psychology of those who betray movements from the inside.
And I sort of got the idea for her from a real-life incident that took place in Northern California, where in the early aughts, a young eco-activist and his circle of friends were infiltrated by an FBI agent, a female FBI agent, and this guy fell in love with her, and she convinced him, I really might love you also.
And for your labor history fix, social media guy Harold Phillips returns with Shows You Should Know, spotlighting new episodes from Labor and Energy Union podcast, Work Stoppage, Labor John, and Tales from the Ruther Library. That's all ahead on this week's Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, and don't forget, subscribe, share, and check out all our shows at laborradionetwork.org. I'm Chris Garlock. That's all coming up on this week's edition of the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly. Let's get started.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
A battle in Alabama caught our attention. Coal miners in one community on strike for months.
Working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
This is Overtime of the Valley Labor Report, the largest union talk radio and online news outfit in the South, coming to you from the heart of the Tennessee Valley in the Spice Radio studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We are run by working people and for working people in the South and all over the country. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller. We appreciate you spending time with us. Let's get to our guest. Chuck Corra is a host of Podlatcha, a podcast about news, politics, culture in Appalachia. Chuck, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
You know, this one big, beautiful bill passed last week. It's been signed into law. You're in Tennessee. You're from Appalachia. What are people in your neck of the woods saying about this bill? You know, regular folks, politicians, media figures.
This bill is terrible. A lot of the politicians, they're at least outwardly for it because, you know, either they genuinely support it or they have to support it because it's backed by Donald Trump. And that's what the political people are saying in this region. But it's really scary because most people didn't know about this bill until very late in the game. Very, very late in the game. One of the most devastating parts of this new law is the cuts to Medicaid. And Medicaid, I mean, for people that just don't really know, it's the single largest health insurance program in the United States. It covers 71 million low-income, disabled, and elderly U.S. residents. And I think one thing that is particularly troubling is that I believe like a lot of people in the region and just throughout the country don't necessarily know that this is going to impact them. In Tennessee, the program is called TennCare. If you're on TennCare, you might not realize that that's actually Medicaid. I've seen estimates anywhere from like 11 to 17 million people could lose their coverage within the next 5 to 10 years on Medicaid. These are people that desperately need it. This is something where, like, just to put it in perspective, Medicaid covers half of all U.S. births. It pays for the care of 6 in 10 nursing home residents. And like this bill over the time, I've seen estimates where it's going to cut over time, like close to $1 trillion in cuts to the program. Now that to me is insane. And I think the biggest impact it's going to have on Appalachia, this is a region where we rely on rural hospitals. It's a region that's a very rural region. And even before this new bill was signed into law, we already had huge problems with rural hospital closures, especially in Tennessee. They were closing all the time in Tennessee. This is going to exacerbate that tremendously because Medicaid pays for rural hospitals a lot. That's a big part of how rural hospitals survive. This is going to be absolutely devastating for that and devastating for so many people that are on this program. They're benefiting from it and are going to have such a devastating awakening when they realize they're no longer going to be covered. I truly think that there were a lot of Democrats that believed that this wasn't going to go anywhere because of the Medicaid cuts, because the Medicaid, like cuts to Medicaid, Social Security, and Medicare have always been viewed as a third rail. American politics is something you just don't do because they're incredibly unpopular. This administration, Trump in general, in his first term and now, has shown time and time again that you can violate any type of norm in American politics and still survive it. I mean, and if they have not learned this rule yet, then I don't think they're ever going to learn it. And this is, I think this is the largest cut to Medicaid in American history. This is one of the most catastrophic bills I think I've ever seen in our lifetime. And I just don't really understand why there was not a larger sense of urgency. The danger of it, though, is that some of these cuts are going to come into effect when Trump is out of office. And there very well could be a Democrat in office, and the Democrats will get blamed for those cuts no matter what. That's how politics works. And honestly, there's probably parts of this bill that are designed in order to do that. And so I really think that people need to be relentless with how they hold, especially Democrats' feet to the fire, and not be accepting of just the norms and status quo anymore.
Yeah, that's all I got. So solidarity forever, y'all.
See y'all next week.
This is the Labor Exchange on KGNU, Boulder, Denver, and Fort Collins. I'm your host, Robert Lindgren, with the Colorado AFL-CIO and Denver Newspaper Guild. Our guest today is Adam Fox, Deputy Director of the Colorado Consumer Health Initiative. We're talking about Trump's budgets and its effect on healthcare funding. Welcome to the Labor Exchange, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
So Congress passed Trump's budget bill right before the 4th of July weekend. Can you walk us through some of the effects this budget will have on Medicaid and on healthcare?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unfortunately, this bill is going to have profound impacts on health coverage and our healthcare system overall. The bill, all told, plus some of the aspects of the ACA that will be sort of affected later this year, we're anticipating 17 million Americans losing coverage. Most of that is from the cuts to Medicaid. The quote unquote big beautiful bill, but I generally call it the big ugly bill because of its impacts on folks. Really, it cuts almost $1 trillion in Medicaid funds over the next 10 years. And there is no way that states can make up that difference. And that's especially true here in Colorado. And so what that is going to end up meaning is Colorado is going to have to choose who keeps coverage and who loses it. From purely sort of a numbers perspective, I think we don't have a firm, complete grasp on sort of how this is going to play out for Colorado's budget. But most of the estimates put the loss in Medicaid funding alone north of $10 billion over 10 years for the state. So at least $1 billion a year. In reality, it's probably going to be more than that. And so some of the other aspects of this bill are not just sort of the budget impacts, but it also creates more administrative red tape and barriers for folks to access Medicaid. And so we're going to see people lose coverage just because of sort of the administrative hurdles that they have to try to make it through.
My next question, a lot of our union members and listeners to this program, they have private insurance, either provided by an employer or otherwise. How do the cuts to Medicaid affect people with private insurance?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what we can anticipate is with these cuts to Medicaid and the substantial increase in uninsured, it is going to force healthcare clinics and hospitals, especially in rural areas, but really across the state, to probably reduce services and or potentially close altogether. And so when you're talking about especially smaller communities, smaller rural communities, if some of these clinics or hospitals close, that means people have to drive potentially hundreds of miles to get the care that they need. So regardless of whether you have private insurance or Medicaid, you're still going to have to drive that distance if those providers are forced to close from these cuts, and many will be.
I appreciate that answer, Adam. And if folks want to get involved, you can find us at the Colorado AFL-CIO at info@coaflcio.org. You can also reach out online. Thanks so much for joining us on the Labor Exchange.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's Chris, and we'll be right back with the Labor Radio podcast with you. But did you know that Union Plus has provided over $16 million in hardship help to union members since 2012? That includes mortgage grants, disaster relief grants, strike grants, layoff grants, and a lot more. And in 2025, that's this year, Union Plus awarded $200,000 in college scholarships to union families. Now the Union's Power America sweepstakes is back, and you could win $40,000 and an epic trip to New York City. Enter today at unionpowerusa.com. Boost your chances of winning with some fun bonus activities. No purchase necessary. See official rules at unionpowerusa.com.
Welcome back to Leadership to Membership. I'm Kenny Cooper, the International President. Today I'm joined with International Secretary Treasurer Paul Noble and Director of Construction, Matt Pauls. So some of the things we want to talk about is, in particular, is data centers. 2 weeks ago, I met with the CEO of Microsoft. I've met in the past with the CEO of Google. We're looking at a boom of data centers coming throughout the United States and North America. One of the things I reminded the Microsoft CEO about is when the Bureau of Labor Statistics says we need 100,000 new electrical workers a year till 2032, I reminded him that's the entire electrical industry, because if we build all these data centers, we got to power them somehow. So there's a combination of talks when we talk about data centers that I think is important that we have those conversations as well, because we got to generate the power necessary for those data centers and the AI technology that's coming with them.
Well, to start, maybe let's talk a little bit about what's out there now and what we see coming. There's a little over 5,000 active data centers right now in the United States. There was a little over 6,000 megawatts of a data center load under construction at the end of last year, and it's just going to ramp up from there. To throw some stats out there, about 20% of organizations said that they've already deploying AI, and over 55% are planning to do it in the very near future. So the AI-driven boom is not going to slow. It's going to drive the need for increased power generation to power these data centers, but AI itself is also an integral part of these data centers and how they operate.
What is the average cost of those data centers when they build them? And what's the average manpower and how long? I know most of that work, when we talk about a data center, is electrical work.
Sure.
So it's big jobs for the IBW and our membership and stuff.
Definitely electrically heavy. I think it's a little light, but the customer we were on a Zoom with late last week, they threw out the number that for planning that around 200 to 300 electricians per site is a good number just to ballpark things.
As an average.
As an average, right? And it varies.
It peaks a lot higher than that.
Sure.
And it, ramps up like any other construction site.
But. Correct. Yep, absolutely. But, that's an average size. But you have to keep in mind, most of these locations aren't going to be one data center. They're going to be campuses. Yeah. And they may have half a dozen, 10, 15 or more data centers on one campus. Again, the customer that we met with last week, again, this is just one customer. It's one of the large ones. We're going to need between 8,000 and 12,000 electricians in the next 3 years just for their projects.
You're looking at these rural areas. Staffing obviously has got to be a challenge for some of these locals. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of these locations are in small locals, might only have a few hundred members, and they're going to need 2 or 3 times that for just a data center project or a data center campus. And we have some locals doing some fantastic things, and we are working with the customers to get as much information as early as possible. That's going to be key moving forward. And as you can imagine, that's difficult with non-disclosure agreements and the competition between these companies. That said, we are communicating, and they are getting the message that in order for us to scale up to meet the needs for these projects and the industry long term, we have to have the information as early as we possibly can. So that was a lengthy discussion we had just recently, and the locals really need to embrace every tool in our toolbox. It's that simple. We need to be, once we identify a specific local union or a region where we're going to have some of these projects, we've all got to come together. One small 400-member local is not going to be able to meet the challenge of these types of projects by themselves. We've got to use the tools like we have in the Workforce Recruitment Task Force, WRTF, in identifying, using modern technology to identify the workers that are in the industry and target specific geographical areas where these projects are happening, and get those folks that want to be in the industry into that local union, into one of those projects.
So thank you for now, and we'll catch you on the next podcast.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Tell the world, spread the news today. The brotherhood is here to stay. Yeah.
Welcome to the Heartland Labor Forum. I'm Tino Scalisi. Joining us on the phone for a second time is Rachel Kushner. She's produced several internationally acclaimed works in her career, notably Telex from Cuba, a book of essays, The Hard Crowd, The Incendiary Flamethrowers, Mars Room, and now Creation Lake. To say that I'm excited doesn't even come close. It's a special honor and privilege to spend the next quarter hour with the one, the only, Rachel Kushner. Rachel, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Rachel, if you would, for the very small and unfortunate minority in our listening audience who's not yet heard about Creation Lake, can you give us maybe like a 1 or 2 minute, maybe longer, bird's eye view over that terrain, if that's not too broad of a question?
Yeah, sure. So Creation Lake is it's a contemporary-ish novel. Takes place circa 2013, but maybe feels more recent in certain ways. It features an American woman who is a disgraced former FBI agent, now working for shadowy private interests as a kind of dirty actor, a spy for hire. And she is on assignment in a rural region of France in the central southwest and has been told to infiltrate a group of young anarchists who've set up a like farming collective to try to, live in sync with nature and the seasons and develop relationships with the local dairy farmers and help them in their own struggles. I sort of got the idea for her from a real life incident that took place in Northern California, where in the early aughts, a young eco-activist and his circle of friends were infiltrated by an FBI agent, a female FBI agent. And this guy fell in love with her, and she convinced him, I really might love you also, but to prove to me that, you are the right partner for me and that you're serious about this relationship, you also need to demonstrate that you're serious about the movement, and I need you to buy these bomb building materials. And he did that. And he was arrested and charged and sentenced to 21 years in federal prison, served 9 of those years. And then his lawyer was able to prove through a Freedom of Information Act that this woman had entrapped him. And my question was, what is the mentality of the woman who entraps in that way? Because sometimes you look at cops and you think, oh, they believe in law and order, they're into machismo, there may be, they come from a working class family and their father was a cop. There are all kinds of reasons that people choose the professions that they choose. But in this case, it's not ideological to want to infiltrate an anarchist commune and introduce yourself the possibility of political violence. So what is her mentality? And so my character is sort of my answer to that, which is that she's overconfident. She drinks very heavily, maybe to deal with the fact that she's not a real person. She's, for instance, having a relationship with a young guy that she manipulated into being just in order to get close to his childhood friend, who's the leader of the commune. And so she's sleeping with this person for whom she has no feeling whatsoever, and he thinks that they're in love. She brags about her breast augmentation and how she doesn't need to wear a bra. I mean, that's and that she has these banal good looks. So she's pretty, but after she's screwed over a group of people and has left their milieu behind and moved on to a new assignment, when they go to warn other people about her, there are no identifying traits. They're like, good looking, brown hair, white girl in her 20s.
Right.
So, it was, and then when she looks at other people, like along the lines of what you were saying, sincerity and truth and goodness for her, that's for suckers.
Right.
To her, what's valuable is to be able to identify weakness in other people that they themselves are not aware of.
Right.
And I found it quite wild to occupy that perspective because it's just really different than how I look at the world. I'm always trying to figure out, like, what do other people feel and how am I coming across to them, and can I modify my behavior to do better? I mean, that is just not her concern at all.
Kind is what you are. Yeah. Kind and thoughtful. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us in our Kansas City audience. We'll see you July 8th.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Tino. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
You're listening to the Labor Radio Podcast weekly from the Labor Radio Podcast Network, laborradionetwork.org. During the Unions Power America campaign this summer, they'll be giving away over $300,000 in cash, plus some amazing trips to union members all over the country. This is the 5th year of Unions Power America, so they are giving away more bucks, better prizes than ever before. Enter today, unionpowerusa.com. No purchase necessary. See official rules at unionpowerusa.com. Now, here's Harold with Shows You Should Know.
Thanks, Chris. Social media guy Harold Phillips here again, folks, and I don't think I need to tell you. We are living in historic times, but that doesn't mean that times like these haven't happened throughout history. That's why we study history after all, isn't it? Not just to find out about what happened way back when, but to help us deal with what's happening right now. With that in mind, we thought we'd share some labor history-oriented shows you should know for the week of July 6th. And before we get started, I just want to give a nod to 2 labor history-oriented podcasts on the Labor Radio Podcast Network that put out new content each and every day. I'm talking about Labor History in 2 and Working Class Histories on this day in Working Class History. If you haven't subscribed to them, do yourself a favor. Find them in your podcast app of choice and add them to the queue. You'll get your daily dose of history in under 10 minutes. But hey, if you think that history has to be boring and stodgy, you haven't heard the Labor and Energy Union podcast. In their most recent episode, Liam Byrne introduces us to Bob Hawks and other union legends who brought Australian workers the rights they enjoy at work today. Speaking of rowdy crews, let's hear it for our friends at Work Stoppage. John, Dan, and Lena explore the working class movements that helped shape the Mexican Revolution on their latest Overtime episode. A Patreon subscription is required for this one, folks, but trust me, it's worth the $5. Meanwhile, Sam and Gabe share a presentation they did discussing industrial struggle in Philadelphia's textile mills from the turn of the century to deindustrialization in the 1950s and 60s on Labor John. And Dr. Anna E. Landiner discusses the rise and subsequent downfall of the West Central Organization in Detroit, a coalition of civil rights organizations, community groups, and church congregations that sought to bring attention to housing inequality and other social issues in the 1960s on Tales from the Ruther Library. And you know where to find links to all these shows and the other labor history-oriented radio shows and podcasts in the network, right? At laborradionetwork.org. And if you want to find out what historical events these shows are profiling, or what historical events happening right now the shows in the Labor Radio Podcast Network are profiling, then follow us on social media at Labor Radio Net, on Blue Sky, and on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Though I think that site's going to be history before too long, and not just because of what Grok did the other day. All right, Chris, back to you. I think I'm going to spend the weekend in the air conditioning and crack open a labor history book. I think there's probably a few shows in the network that could make some recommendations on what I should read.
And that's a wrap for this week's edition of the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, our roundup of some of the programs aired over the last week on more than 200 labor radio and podcast shows. They're all part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, shows that focus on working people's issues and concerns. We've got links to all the network shows, laborradionetwork.org. You can also find them. Use the hashtag LaborRadioPod on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Don't forget to let us know what you think of the show. Drop us a note, info@laborradionetwork.org. You can be part of the network. You don't even need a microphone. Labor Radio Podcast Network t-shirts are available. They're union made. You'll find them in all sizes and 2 colors at laborradionetwork.org. This podcast recorded under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. The Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, edited this week by Captain Swing. I produced the show. Our social media guru, always and forever, is Mr. Harold Phillips. And just one more reminder, the Union's Power America sweepstakes are back. You could win $40,000 and an epic trip to New York City. I love New York City. I love Union Plus. I love the sweepstakes. Enter today, unionpowerusa.com. Boost your chances of winning with some fun bonus activities. No purchase necessary. See official rules at unionpowerusa.com. For the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, this has been Chris Garlock. Stay active, stay tuned to your local Labor Radio Podcast show. We will see you next week.